Good morning. I am Molly Brinkerhoff, today's worship associate. Welcome to this first October Sunday service. We gather to worship, our hearts alive with hope that here we will be truly seen, that here we will be welcomed into the garden of this community, where the simple and the elegant, the fluted and the frilled, the shy and the dramatic complement one another and are treasured. May we know that here each contributes in their way to the beauty of the whole. Come, let us worship together, all genders, sexualities, politics, clappers and non-clappers, progressive or conservative. May we root ourselves in the values of this faith: compassion and courage, transcendence, justice, and transformation. We welcome everyone. And we have quite a few weekly announcements today. So we will be having joys and concerns and sorrows. And if you have one, please put them in the chat box now so that we can light a candle for you. And please indicate if it is a sorrow, a concern, or a joy. I was so sad to miss the successful picnic last week, but the church has decided to hold another one next week, October 10th. If the weather is good, it will begin at 12:30. Please bring your lunch, drink, and a chair, and let's congregate and have a good time. Reverend Kevin is offering a class on speaking of parables. Please check the weekly Unitarian Universalist update for more details. If you have any questions, contact our church office. The Reopening Task Force has met to start again reworking on getting us back open. We will keep you posted. Until we do reopen, a great idea was put forth to have a watch party. If you know someone who is having trouble watching our service, invite them to come to your house if you are comfortable, or take a laptop to theirs. What a great way to stay connected and to help someone else. The annual fundraiser and dinner. We are still working on that. We have some wonderful and generous donations for our fundraiser, and we're still looking for more donations and sponsors. Please contact Cindy Logan if you would like to help organize this event, or if you have items, services, or experiences that you would like to offer for bidding at the fundraiser. We have space in the building for items. Just let Cindy know, and she will arrange to meet you here for the drop-off. Double your dollar's impact. A lot of us make regular donations to KISU as a way of supporting both KISU and National Public Radio. Did you know there is a way to double the impact of these donations? Simply let KISU know when you make your donation that you would like it to be credited to the Unitarian Universalist Church in Idaho Falls. You get the tax deduction, and we get on-air announcements letting KISU listeners know about us. And finally, while we no longer have an offertory time during the service, it is still important nonetheless. We would gratefully receive any donations to support us. Just go to our website to click the Give button. And thank you for your support. We will now move into the sacred time of worship. I've amended the flower breath to the leaf breath. Imagine an autumn leaf. Breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth, as though to move the leaf softly in the wind. Think of your breath as the wind, as I ring the peace bowl 3 times. Our church covenant was decided upon by a group of members from this congregation. Our covenant, along with our 7 Unitarian Universalist principles, is our guide to show how our congregation will relate to each other and the world. Even though we cannot be together physically at the moment, I believe it is still important that we read our covenant together. As I read our church covenant for us all, please recite it from home with me. Love is the spirit of this community, and service its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. We will now be lighting our chalice. If you have a candle or chalice available, please light yours with us. We light this flame in our chalice to honor the trees. Fire can bring forth new life to the woods or burn the trees down. A moderate fire can open seeds and pine cones to regenerate a forest, or it can burn so hot that an area takes a long time to recover. Let our little flame bring forth new life. Let us burn moderately to open seeds and pine cones to regenerate our community.
Good morning. Our call to worship this morning comes from the Canticle of Creatures by St. Francis of Assisi. In many Christian churches, tomorrow, October 4th, is celebrated as the feast day of St. Francis. And our call to worship is a religious song believed to have been composed by Francis in the year 1224 when he was recovering from an illness in the small monastery at San Damiano. Be praised, my Lord, through all your creatures, who brings, especially through my Lord, brother Sun, who brings the day, and you give light through him. And he is beautiful and radiant in all his splendor. Of you, most high, he bears the likeness. Praised be you, my Lord, through sister moon and the stars. In heaven you form them clear and precious and beautiful. Praise be you, my Lord, through brother wind. And through the air, cloudy and serene, and every kind of weather through which you give sustenance to your creatures. Praise to you, my Lord, through sister water, which is very useful and humble and precious and chaste. Praise be you, my Lord, through brother fire, through whom you light the night, and he is beautiful and playful and robust and strong. Praised be you, my Lord, through sister Mother Earth, who sustains us and governs us, and who produces varied fruits with colored flowers and herbs. I invite you now to join in our opening hymn, number 15, The Lone Wild Bird.
Divine. all ages is The Wounded Seal, found in Moral Tales and Tapestry of Faith, adapted from a Scottish folktale in the fairy mythology by Thomas Keightley. Read by Elizabeth Coyote, Director of Lifespan Faith Development. Long ago in Scotland, there was a small fishing village that stood at the edge of the sea. Now in this village was a man who had made his living from the killing of seals and selling their skins in the market. His father and grandfather before him had done it, and it was the only way that he knew how to make a living. One day the seal hunter got into his small boat and rowed out from the rocky shores. He rowed and rowed until he came to the place where the seals were gathered. He put in his oars and let the boat drift. He watched as the seals swam and played together. Soon a large gray seal came up beside the boat. Quickly he stabbed his knife into the seal and reached for his net, but before he could throw the net over the seal, it swam away with the seal hunter's knife still in its side. The seal hunter fished for small fish that day and then rowed home. That night, as he was eating his dinner, there came a knock on the door. There stood a woman who had come to his door on horseback. She was handsomely dressed, but her eyes were sad. "There is a rich man who would like to buy many sealskins from you," she said. "I will take you to him." She beckoned for the seal hunter to jump up behind her on her horse, and they rode like the wind. Soon they came to the edge of the cliffs, and they dismounted. The seal hunter looked around, but he could not see anyone else there. He was about to ask where the rich man was, when the handsome woman took him by the hand and pulled him over the edge of the cliff. Down, down they fell through the air and then into the cold sea below. They swam deeper and deeper, and soon the seal hunter realized that he could breathe underwater. In fact, he saw that his body and that of his companion had become seal bodies. They swam deeper and deeper under the water until they came to a cave opening in the side of a rock face. They swam into the cave. As they swam deeper and deeper into the cave, the seal hunter realized that they were in a great seal compound, a place with halls and rooms where many seals lived. The halls were dimly lit, but he could see many seals watching them as they swam by. All of the seals looked very sad, and there was a gloomy feeling all around them. Suddenly his companion stopped and showed the seal hunter a large fishing knife. "Is this yours?" she asked. "Yes," said the seal hunter honestly. "I lost it today when I speared a large seal that swam away with it." "That seal is my father," said the companion. "He now lies dying, and only you can save him." They came at that point into a darkened room. In the center of the room on a flat rock was a large seal with a deep wound in his hindquarters. All around, seals stood looking on sadly. "Lay your hands upon the wound," instructed the companion. The seal hunter felt afraid, but he swam forward and placed his hand over the wound of the seal. All the seals swam closer to watch him. The seal hunter was surprised to feel a great surge of feelings coming from the seal when he placed his hand upon the wound. They were feelings that he had never felt so strongly before. There was great pain and sadness and hopelessness, as if the world would never be right again. But gradually the wound began to heal, and as it did, the seal hunter began to feel peace spread through him, and then hope, and then the greatest joy. Suddenly the large seal rose up as if he had never been injured. There was great rejoicing in the compound. The seal hunter's companion took him by the arm and said to him, "I will take you home now, but first you must promise that you will never hunt seal again." The man did not know how he would ever make a living, but he also knew that he could not hurt the seals again. The two swam up out of the cave and up through the cold green water to the surface, and then flew up through the air until they stood on the cliffs again. They jumped on the horse's back and rode like the wind back to the man's home. There he jumped down from the horse. As his companion turned to go, she thanked the seal hunter. He saw that her eyes were no longer sad. The man kept his word, and he never hunted the seals again. The end.
Ours is a welcoming community where we find connection, a spiritual community where we find meaning. Ours is a sharing community where our joys are amplified, a caring community where our sorrows are lessened. We take this moment to reflect on our joys and sorrows and acknowledge the mutual support of our community. I will now read the joys, concerns, and sorrows we received via the chat box, and Reverend Kevin will light a candle for each. So first I have one from Allison McCready, and she wants to say happy birthday to her sister, Megan McCready McConnell. So happy birthday, Megan. The second is also a joy from Bob and Roby. They're going to see their son in Portland this month for the first time in 2 years. I myself have two. I have one joy where last week I got to spend a whole week with my niece and her fiance in our motorhome, touring Yellowstone, and it was really a lot of fun. And then I have a light a candle for a concern for Idaho. I just think in some ways we've gone mad in terms of the COVID crisis. So I light a candle hoping that people realize the seriousness and start wearing masks. And anyone else? Alrighty, so we light one more candle in honor of those joys, concerns, and sorrows that we keep in our hearts but are not willing quite yet to share. And may we remember those who have spoken, those we have named, and those we hold in silence in our hearts.
Our reading this morning is an excerpt from the June 2020 resolution passed by the Nez Perce Tribal General Council recognizing the rights of the Snake River. Whereas the Nez Perce or Nemeapo have always believed that rivers are alive, including the Snake River, and have long strived to live in harmony with river ecosystems, treating them with respect and care. Whereas the Nez Perce tribe relies upon a healthy Snake River in order to fully exercise its rights to fish, conduct cultural, religious, and spiritual activities, and to otherwise enjoy a fulfilling relationship with the river. Whereas the Snake River and all the species that it supports, particularly salmon, have long been central to the stories, legends, ceremonies, and very identity of the Nez Perce tribe. Whereas salmon once spawned by the millions in the Snake River, but now their very existence is in jeopardy due to an onslaught of harms such as water pollution, overdiversion, and damming, with resulting salmon declines impacting the entire web of life, from eagles and bears to orcas and humans. Whereas the underlying driver behind the degradation of the Snake River is the legal system's overarching treatment of nature as mere human property to be exploited for short-term economic gains, rather than treating nature as a life-giving entity with its own rights. Whereas the Nez Perce tribe wishes to harmonize its own legal system with its long-standing belief that the Snake River is alive, including by recognizing the river as a subject of rights, with the ultimate goal of ensuring that the Nez Perce thrive in harmony with a healthy Snake River. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Nez Perce tribe recognizes that the Snake River is a living entity that possesses fundamental rights in accordance with long-standing Nez Perce beliefs and practices. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Snake River and all the life it supports possess the following fundamental rights. At minimum, the right to exist, the right to flourish, the right to evolve, and the right to flow, the right to regenerate, and the right to restoration. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Nez Perce tribe recognizes that as a living entity that possesses fundamental rights, the Snake River shall be represented by legal guardians whose duty it is to act on behalf of the rights and interest of the Snake River.
Golden breaks the dawn, comes the eastern sun.
In the spring of 1990, about a year after the infamous Exxon Valdez oil spill, I attended a meeting of the local Sierra Club chapter in Houston, Texas, and the guest speaker that evening was a biologist from Texas Parks and Wildlife. His presentation was about the risk of oil spills around the Houston area, with its ship channel that stretches roughly 50 miles to the Gulf of Mexico. In addition to making Houston a port city, the ship channel is a continuous corridor of oil refineries, storage facilities, and petrochemical plants that has contributed to Houston becoming known as the energy capital of the world. An important part of the presentation that night was about how the state evaluates the damage to wildlife and the environment following an incident. I remember being fascinated and somewhat appalled at the way the individual animals and birds were given a monetary value in determining the fine that would be levied. Small to medium spills were a regular occurrence in the marshes and wetlands of the area. Larger, more charismatic wildlife, such as white-tailed deer, were considered more valuable, worth a few dollars each, and the monetary scale diminished down the list in proportion to the animal's size and its perceived utilitarian value to human beings. Flora as well as fauna had a price too, and even a small spill could result in a several $1,000 fine when all the dead critters and plants were counted, even if most of them were only valued at a few cents each. But given the enormous profits to be made, the risk of spills and resulting fines were a small price to pay, easily built into the cost of doing business. And to be fair, all of us who create the demand for oil and gas products bear at least some share of the blame for the harm we are doing to the environment. It would be too easy to just simply blame big oil and let ourselves off the hook. I believe it is good that agencies like Texas Parks and Wildlife have at least some means for penalizing those who kill or injure wildlife or damage natural ecosystems. But the simple truth remains that the calculus is based on a view of nature as a commodity, valued only because of its perceived usefulness for human exploitation, even if it is merely envisioned as part of something wild for us to enjoy for recreation. There is no consideration in determining the damages for the harm done to an individual deer or bird from their perspective, much less a patch of marshland or a river. This commodification of nature may be more pronounced in modern civilization, but it has deep roots in Western thinking, including the Judeo-Christian idea of humankind's dominion over the earth and its creatures. In the 4th century BCE, for example, Aristotle wrote in his treatise Politics, "Plants exist for the sake of animals, and animals for the sake of man. Domestic animals for his use and food, wild ones for food and other accessories of life, such as clothing and various tools. Since nature makes nothing purposeless or in vain, it is undeniably true that she has made all the animals for the sake of man." It would be disingenuous to dispute our dependence on plants and animals for sustenance, but it is certainly a legitimate question as to whether all of creation was made for the sake of man. Aristotle may have asserted that it was undeniably true, but that assumes a very anthropocentric point of view, which became the basis of the idea developed further by Plato and later Christian philosophers of a great chain of being, a hierarchy of creatures from the plants to the so-called lower animals to the higher animals to humans, angels, and God. From our lofty height near the top of the ladder, it has been easy to justify the exploitation of all species down below. Moral questions about the degree that animals suffered in their treatment and slaughter have continued to be an issue. But society has seldom questioned our perceived human right to use animals for food and clothing. By the time Descartes and the Enlightenment came along, the prevailing view was that animals were mere machines and were not capable of thoughts. And as for plants and non-living entities such as mountains and rivers, their use and exploitation has been assumed with little regard. Waterways have been polluted with reckless abandon, and the land has been mined in ways that has often destroyed nearby streams and valleys, even entire mountaintops. Disputes about toxic contamination and water rights are a relatively recent development, and even today such disputes are almost entirely centered on human need and human harm. But what if our thinking and the law evolved to imagine nature herself as having inherent worth and even legal rights? What if animals, plants, the rivers and forests, or even the earth herself could be a plaintiff who must be considered when there is harm or the potential for harm and courts become involved? What if nature had a legal advocate who spoke on her behalf? Someone like the Lorax in Dr. Seuss's story, who spoke for the trees. From a modern Western perspective, such ideas may seem strange or radical, even silly to many people. But for many indigenous peoples, as well as all of our ancestors, the personhood of animals, plants, and even stones and rivers would not thought to be strange at all. And throughout history, there have been people like Francis of Assisi who advocated for the equality of all creatures. But until recent decades, such people have been outliers at best. From our modern perspective, we may be tempted to dismiss the idea that everything is somehow alive and even sacred as primitive animism. After all, we have plenty of science to differentiate between the organic and inorganic components of the natural world. And we know about the origins of things from cosmological, geological, and biological evolution. But let us not abandon the value of at least a poetic or conceptual appreciation of the personhood of nature in considering her fundamental rights. If something as abstract as a corporation can be classified as a legal person and possess rights, why not something as tangible and majestic as the Snake River? It is also important to remember that our Western concept of legal rights is not the only way of understanding our relationship with the earth and her creatures. Among indigenous peoples, these relationships have been primarily imagined through a lens of mutuality and our human responsibilities to the denizens of the natural world. As Chief Luther Standing Bear of the Lakota Sioux said, "Kinship with all creatures of the earth, sky, and water was a real and active principle. In the animal and bird world, there existed a brotherly feeling that kept us safe among them. The animals had rights, the rights of man's protection, the right to live, the right to multiply, the right to freedom, and the right to man's indebtedness." By reclaiming their ancient understanding of the human-nature relationship, indigenous peoples are leading the way in the rights of nature movement in the United States and around the world. In 2003, for example, the Navajo Tribal Council amended the Navajo Nation Code to explicitly acknowledge the rights of all creation. And in 2015, the Ho-Chunk Nation of Wisconsin amended their constitution to include the statement, "Ecosystems and natural communities within the Ho-Chunk territory possess an inherent, fundamental, and inalienable right to exist and thrive." Similar efforts have taken place in Ecuador, New Zealand, and even here in Idaho with the Nez Perce and the Snake River. A recent example from New Zealand is really fascinating. In 2014, after years of negotiation between the indigenous Maori people and the New Zealand government, the Wanganui River, which is the third longest river in the country, was recognized as having the same legal rights as a person. A remarkable aspect of the final agreement is that it recognized the holistic understanding of the Maori's relationship with the river, a concept the Maori call te awa tapua, which includes the physical and metaphysical elements of the river from its source in the mountains to the terminus at the sea. The Maori philosophy of nature is based on two concepts they call Whanangatanga and Kateakitanga, which loosely translate to kinship and stewardship. For the Maori, the kinship implications of Whanangatanga are more than we typically think of as the kinship between human beings. They extended the idea to include the living and the dead, the earth's land, water, flora, and fauna, and even the spiritual realm of the Atua, or gods. With such a concept of kinship, their concept of stewardship means they have obligations to all living things, the natural world, and even their ancestors and deities. With respect to the Wanganui River, this complex philosophy is summed up in their saying, Ko'au te awa, ko te awa ko'au. I am the river is me. By explicitly acknowledging the Maori's beliefs in the legal document protecting the river, the New Zealand government moved beyond centuries of colonial disregard and demonstrated a way that countries around the world might engage with indigenous peoples to protect the environment. There are also, of course, many other rights of nature efforts that have emerged within more traditional Western legal systems, especially since the environmental movement became more visible in the 1970s. Bolstered in America by the passage of the Endangered Species Act and other legislation that sought to protect natural environments and resources, a long series of lawsuits have begun to establish the rights of nature in different ways and chip away at the legal power of big corporations and exploitive industries. Lawsuits on behalf of rivers, orcas, forest, fish, birds, and other species have generated a growing body of case law for future reference. It has been a difficult process with mixed results, and most of the successes have been at the local ordinance level in towns and communities across the country. Many are specifically aimed at protecting water, wildlife, and forest against threats like fracking for natural gas. These efforts have been less successful at the state and federal level because of the enormous power of large corporations who can point to centuries of legal precedent that, of course, favors their position. Other efforts have been well-intentioned, but mostly end up as toothless statements of our aspirations. In 1977, for example, UNESCO, the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, issued the Universal Declaration of Animal Rights, which stated that animals have the right to life, liberty, and procreation in their natural environment. This was not a legally binding document, though, and clearly it has done little to protect animals in recent decades. According to the World Wildlife Fund's Living Planet report from 2020, since 1970, the populations of almost 4,400 species of mammals, fish, birds, reptiles, and amphibians that they monitor have declined by an average of 68%. Even so-called charismatic megafauna like orcas and elephants are in decline, species that get extra attention because of their appeal to our sense of awe and wonder. If you're some small, unattractive critter, your odds are probably much worse. It is important to acknowledge, though, that small recognitions of the rights of nature or issuing declarations from UNESCO may not magically guarantee animal protection or conservation, but each new effort provides another legal weapon in the fight. Laws evolve as societies evolve, and those of us with a more progressive worldview will often be frustrated with the rate of change. For now, we can take heart in changes like the revolutionary change in the Constitution of Ecuador, which in 2008 adopted 4 articles that established the rights of nature, or Pachamama. As one of the articles states, nature, or Pachamama, where life is reproduced and occurs, has the right to integral respect for its existence and the maintenance and regeneration of its life cycles, structure, functions, and evolutionary processes. Time will tell if courts enforce these rights in a meaningful way, but it is a bold start. A handful of other countries have also enacted national laws or constitutional changes guaranteeing legal status to nature in some form. Around the world, people are awakening to the horrific history of how humanity has treated the plants and animals with whom we share the planet, and the natural resources we all depend on. An effort called the Global Alliance for the Rights of Nature has united organizations from at least a dozen countries, and millions of people support the idea of a universal declaration of the rights of Mother Earth. But if we are honest, most of the human population of our planet remains enthralled by an unsustainable consumer lifestyle, or confronts a daily struggle to just survive and thrive. Like so many social issues, making progress on the rights of nature is a moral struggle that intersects many other moral struggles. Addressing hunger, poverty, and education are critical to making the rights of nature a truly global initiative and not something that only concerns the citizens of more affluent countries. But like the related challenges of climate change and mass extinctions, recognizing the rights of nature and making meaningful changes in response is something that will benefit all of us in the long run. And for those of us in countries with the means to make a difference, the earth cries out for us to do so. We could start here in Idaho by supporting the Nez Perce recognition of the rights of the Snake River, and by stopping the unscientific slaughter of wolves in Idaho and Montana. We have a moral obligation. The more we learn about the mutuality of the interdependent web of all existence, how our very lives depend on a network of relationships from the tiniest microbes in our digestive tract to the vast ecosystems that provide the oxygen we breathe, the more clearly we understand what the theologian Thomas Berry meant when he said, "The universe is a communion of subjects, not a collection of objects. As a communion of subjects, we must acknowledge and respect the inherent value of nature. We must remain in right relationship with all the earth's creatures and natural wonders. We could learn new ways of thinking about the meaning of kinship from the Maori and other indigenous peoples. We could mine the cultural resources of generations of thinkers, saints and sages, scientists and poets, to find ways to see our non-human neighbors as people who possess dignity and rights beyond their usefulness to us. And if someday we find ourselves being asked, who speaks for the trees, we can answer emphatically, we do. I invite you now to join in our closing hymn, number 27, I Am That Great and Fiery Force.
Shining of the river on the seas, in burning sun, in moon and stars, in unseen wind, in verdant trees. I breathe within both near and far, and where I breathe there is no death, and meadows glow with beauty's rife. I am in all the Spirit's breath, the thundered word, for I am life.
Our closing words are the poem Prayer for the Earth by Harriet Kofal, inspired by the Bribri indigenous people of Costa Rica. Long ago, the ancients say this land was free, and we shared it all with the mountains and the sea, the birds and the trees. We lived in peace. Long ago, before the others came and built fences by cutting the trees, dug mines by cutting the earth, removed her blood, the oil that lies within, formed long ago like us who lived in peace. The birds sang less without the trees. The land became dry without the birds to plant the flowers. And we too became quiet, watching our mountains die, listening for the birds that no longer flew, but we still lived in peace. What sustained us through all those years? The nights of silence and the songs of the frogs. For we know, as the ancients said, this land will again be free and will again share it all with the mountains and the sea, the birds and the trees, for we still live in peace, and we wish you the same, for we are all one.
We will now extinguish this our chalice with the following words. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. And I have one more invitation from Nancy and Larry Frank. They are so blessed to live in such an incredibly beautiful area, and they would like to invite anyone who would like to take a fall drive out to the Palisades Lake, that they are welcomed to come visit. They can give you directions to backcountry drives to see the colors, or it's always nice to simply enjoy wine and goodies on their deck overlooking the lake. So if you're interested, give them a call. And now we will go into our postlude.